What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we are back with another Detroit Lions video, of course, and today we're going to be diving into a hot topic, a player in Baltimore that could be on the move, Lamar Jackson. The question of today's video is, should the Detroit Lions be interested? Let's get it started. Welcome everybody to another video. Glad you guys are here, and yes, we're back to talk some Lions, man, and I'm excited to do this video. I wasn't sure if I wanted to do this right now. I thought about pushing it back. I know free agency is around the corner, and maybe this is something that's not necessary to talk about right now. However, at the same time, I feel like if I don't do this video right now, I may never do this video because things happen fast in the NFL, and before you know it, he may be on another team, and at that point, it would make no sense for me to make a video like this. So because of that, I was like, you know what, I'm going to knock it out now. I want to do this video, that way you guys understand where I stand on this situation, that way I can always point you guys to it, because otherwise, you may not really know how I feel about this, and I want to tell you how I feel about this whole, should the Detroit Lions be interested in Lamar Jackson situation. And I think the best way for me to do that is by showing a lot of numbers, but also on top of that, I did go back, watched 3-4 games of his all-22 film, charted some of the accuracy. The reason I did that was more so for me to get a sense of what he looked like in an offense, what their offense looked like, because I'm going to be honest with you guys, I don't watch the Ravens, all right? I don't put the Lions game on and put the Ravens game next to it and be like, hey, how's Lamar doing? I don't do that, all right? I've maybe seen him play a few regular season games, like if they get a standalone prime time or they're in the playoffs. Outside of that, I don't watch the Ravens, so for me to be fair, I wanted to go see what he looks like. So I have that in the back of my mind, have some notes from that, but also just to make it a little bit more digestible, instead of making it kind of subjective in that sense and basing it all on what I saw in film, I'm instead going to show you guys a lot of numbers, because I think for this, numbers are really what this is all about, statistically, and also based on what you'd be paying Lamar Jackson. And I think that's how I'm going to kind of give you guys where I stand on this entire situation with a lot of numbers. Start right there, okay? And this is where issues already kind of start to present themselves for me, and this honestly carries across everything I'm going to talk about in today's video. But how do you acquire Lamar Jackson? Okay, why is this guy looked at as available right now? Well, here's the situation. So the Baltimore Ravens gave Lamar Jackson, all right, his contract was up. They gave him a non-exclusive franchise tag, which basically means that his cap hit for this next coming season is about $32.5 million, a little bit higher than Jared Goff's for the next couple of years. $32.5 million. How do you acquire him from the Baltimore Ravens? Well, because they gave him that tag, teams are able to negotiate with Lamar. So for example, if you're a team that wants to go acquire him, you can negotiate with him. If he likes the deal and he says, yep, I want to do that, then it goes back to Baltimore. Baltimore has an opportunity to match that deal that you offered Baltimore. If they say no, then you got to give him some first-round picks, and then, of course, you're paying Lamar Jackson because you just negotiated that new deal with him. Those are where all the problems start, right there. And I need you guys to keep this in your mind as we go through this, okay? Because it's not just, well, that's a big number. I don't like that. It's how it makes sense to getting to where we ultimately want to be. Because I'm trying to look at this from the perspective of, do we want to be a playoff team? Do we want to be exciting? Do we want to sell tickets? Or do we want to win a Super Bowl? I mean, that's what every team's goal should be. There's only one thing that matters. Realistically, it all does. Now, it's fun as a fan to watch a team that's in the playoffs, but there's only one thing that really matters, and that's winning the Super Bowl. It's not going to be looked at as success because you didn't win the whole thing. That's a lot of the question I'm trying to tackle in this one is, do I think that going out and trying to go get Lamar Jackson improves the Lions' chances of winning the Super Bowl? That's what I want to talk about. So with that, it's been reported that Lamar Jackson was looking to a deal similar to Deshaun Watson's 5-year, $230 million deal, all guaranteed, which is $46 million per season, that he was looking for something similar to that. The ways, like we said, that you can acquire him from the Baltimore Ravens is the first scenario where you, again, give him a deal that he likes, Ravens don't match that deal, then you have to give up 2 first-round picks to acquire. It's kind of like a restricted free agent tender. What would those 2 picks have to be? They would have to be a first-round pick from this year and a first-round pick from next year, 2023 and 2024. Unless this happens after the draft, because in that case, it could push itself back and be a first-round pick from 2024 and 2025. With that being said, yes, it does eliminate certain teams that don't have a first-round pick this year and next year, so you have to have that. Lions do have that. All right. And then the other scenario, of course, is you could just send a big time trade offer to the Baltimore Ravens, which I believe would take place after the draft. And Lamar would have to also sign his tag. And then you could do that sign and trade kind of deal. So that's also the other option. But the one that's most talked about is the 2 first-round picks plus negotiating with him, because right now it's like, well, if the Ravens don't match it, you're going to get him. And it's only 2 first-round picks. And maybe it takes more than that if it's not in the scenario where you only have to give up 2 first-round picks. Me, right here is where the issues start. It was reported by ESPN that the Baltimore Ravens, I guess basically offered him a 5-year, $250 million deal, which is $50 million per season. To put that into perspective, okay, we're talking cap hits here, but to put that in perspective, Jared Goff's cap hits for the next 2 seasons are basically $31 million. So almost $20 million more per season. But on top of that, $133 million of that would be guaranteed, which, by the way, would be the second most guaranteed money given out in NFL history behind Deshaun Watson, because this was fully guaranteed. And it was reported that the Baltimore Ravens didn't want that. I don't know if this stuff is true or not. I'm not trying to say whether it is. I've just read these reports, so that's what I'm telling you. But if this is true, NFL, they're trying to send a message, this and that, all these teams are out, they don't want to get better. It's like, no, that's not the situation. It's not that they don't want to get better. It's just that it doesn't make sense. It really does not make sense. Because here's the issue, especially when you're talking fully guaranteed. Here's the biggest issue with that for a second. The biggest issue with a fully guaranteed contract, one is obviously there's no really out of the contract because it's guaranteed. And number two, you can't restructure the deal. You can't open up flexibility. So it's like one of these situations where, well, I can't move the deal to create much flexibility here because there's no base salary. The reason there's no base salary is because it's all guaranteed. When you have base salary, you can convert base salary to signing bonus, spread it out to the rest of the deal, maybe throw a void year on, and once you do that, now you open up cap space or lower the cap hit for that season. If you give out a fully guaranteed deal, there is no base salary. I mean, the base salary is something that you can adjust because it's guaranteed. It's not like, well, if you're here, then it's not that anymore. So those are two monster issues with it. You see all these teams like, we're not interested in this, and I'm sure someone will be interested, but I also hear the point, and I hear this a lot, and I just want to address it now. Well, Kyler Murray got paid. Russell Wilson got paid. You know, the Browns did it. So he's worth it because he's won an MVP. Here's my issue with this. Number one, has any of those worked out? And number two, look at who's paying those quarterbacks. See, I was laying down, I was sleeping on this, and I was thinking about it last night. And when you just think about these three teams, right, those teams that have basically paid their quarterback like this, think about this. Let's start with the Cleveland Browns. The Cleveland Browns, who were in a situation where they had just won a playoff game with Baker Mayfield, and we'll see how this works out for them, but they just won a playoff game. They saw Deshaun Watson was available, and they went all in. That's why they gave this massive deal that people don't seem to love. Reason being, though, the Cleveland Browns historically are desperate to find any sort of quarterback. If we're being honest, the Cleveland Browns, the best quarterback I've probably seen in my lifetime for Cleveland, okay, is Baker Mayfield. I mean, really, like, they have never had a quarterback. They haven't had a quarterback in so long. So Cleveland is desperate. They're one of those teams that, like, man, we can get a top-tier quarterback. We clearly cannot draft one. He's available. We're going to do everything we can to make sure that he is a Cleveland Brown. So that type of deal happens. To me, it's not much different than the other two. Denver Broncos, they're desperate. All right, Denver has had a disaster at quarterback since Peyton Manning, and that worked for a couple years. They won their Super Bowl. Heck, they were successful with Tim Tebow. Since then, they have not been able to figure out quarterback whatsoever. And we know John Elway is there, a former quarterback himself, who tries to pride himself on that. So when Russell's available, oh man, we got to get that guy here. They're desperate. And finally, Arizona. I think Arizona's more in a situation where I was like, you kind of have to pay the guy. I mean, Cliff Kingsbury drafted him on top of Rosen the next season. I wouldn't have paid him. Okay, well, he's mobile. I mean, he's got a big arm, right? He's creative. Like, I wouldn't have paid the dude. I didn't think Kyler Murray was better than Jared Goff. I wouldn't have paid him. It was kind of felt like after they did it, like they're like, oh, we don't love this, because they're putting things in there like, hey, you got to study film. We all remember that. You got to study film. Whatever you want to make of that, the point is it was in there. And that's not something that usually comes out, right? So the whole situation is those three teams that have paid the quarterbacks, number one, it hasn't worked at all to this point. And number two, they've been desperate for quarterbacks. A franchise that needs to sell tickets, they haven't been able to figure out quarterback. You might get a little desperate and say, man, we got to go get that guy. The Lions don't want to be a desperate team where they're making desperate moves. That leads to issues and you get stuck with things. So when I see teams that are like, nah, we're not interested in that, it's not because they're like, oh man, we don't want to get better. It's like, no, it doesn't make any sense. If that deal was reportedly offered and he does not accept that, look, I'm just saying, to give him a bigger deal than that with more guarantees than almost than half of his contract and $250 million is insane to me. It's insane. I wouldn't have paid him if I was Baltimore. I would not have paid him more than that if I was Baltimore. Ain't no way I'm giving this dude a fully guaranteed contract. You got to think I'm crazy. I'm not being stuck with that. And we're not even talking about like your pocket passer, your typical NFL quarterback pocket passer that's not dealing with injuries, that kind of thing. Even then, I'd still be worried about it. That's not who Lamar is. He's been injured the last 2 seasons. I put it on the left here. Look at his health. 2022, missed 6 games. Now, I understand some of that he kind of just sat out, but, I mean, are we not going to count it that he just sat out? 6 games, 2022, Denver, he was injured in that game. 2021, missed the last 5 games of the season. He had a back injury he played through. He also had a concussion that year. And you go back to when he was at Louisville, he had a game missed for an ankle injury as well. It's been the ankle injury for him. Move over to some numbers here because, again, like I said, the point of this video is not for me to say, is Jared Goff better than Lamar Jackson, okay? And I'll give my take on that a little bit, but that's not the point of this video. The point of this video is to me to demonstrate, do I believe that making a move and trying to go acquire this guy, Lamar Jackson, improves your chances of winning the Super Bowl? Does that actually improve your chances? And I think the best way to do that is kind of by looking at it like by numbers or like, you know, the Moneyball situation for baseball. To me, I'm kind of looking at it in that sense of what actually is going to help us get to a Super Bowl. So let's take a look at some numbers here just for comparison as we start to kind of go through this. I'll throw different numbers up as we go through this. We'll start with this one. This one's a little bit more basic, okay? This is since Lamar Jackson entered the league in 2018. His stats are on the left, Jared Goff's on the right. I highlighted those per season stats, which ones were better. Goff higher completion percentage, yards per season passing by far, like 1,600 more. Way more total yards per season, okay? Now, obviously, part of this is games played, okay? When you have a shortened season, a guy plays a little bit longer, that's going to affect that as well, so keep that in mind. I would say Lamar has a little bit better of a touchdown to interception ratio, not by a lot, but a little bit better, and a touch higher passer rating within that time as well. And again, there's a lot of factors, like for example, last season was one of Goff's worst seasons, 2021. It was a disaster around him, so like things like that are obviously going to impact this, but I'm just putting it all together just to kind of be able to see it. But here again is where I get back to an issue. All right, so on the bottom left, I put defensive rankings, and these are defensive rankings in terms of points allowed. That's what I care about. I don't care about yards. How many points did you allow per game? And as you can see on the bottom left there, two sides of the stats that I just showed there. Number one, you have to keep in mind that Jared Goff had already been in the league for 2 years. So in fairness to him, he's kind of got a head start. However, the flip side of this is that Lamar Jackson has also been on a very, very cheap deal for basically the entire time that he's been in the NFL. Meaning there's not really much to point and look at and say, well, did it work when we were paying him what he's looking to get paid? Last year would be the closest thing you could point to, and still his cap, it was only $23 million. In comparison to Goff, $31.1 million cap hit. A lot of this could have to do with how well you build a team. But the point being is that he really hasn't got paid yet. So when you take a look at the bottom left there, one of the best defenses in the league every single season. And obviously they've had some good records, 10-6, 14-2, 11-5, 8-9 in 2021, where you can see, oh wow, that's surprising. Their defense took a step back. And in 2022, third again, 10-7 this past season. He was more so like 7-4 because if you don't count the Denver Broncos game. So I point that out because then you flip it to the other side. And again, this is putting it in perspective because what I want to see here, if I was going to make this kind of move, I need to see a gap. I need to make this move and say, man, we're getting so much better at quarterback that paying that much money makes sense. All right. But then when you flip it to the other side of it and you look at Jared Goff with the LA Rams first, 13-3, 20th ranked defense in terms of points allowed. 2019, 9-7, they were 17th in points allowed. 2020, best defense in points allowed. They went 10-6 that season. The 2021 with the Lions, 3-13-1. We had the 31st ranked defense, but obviously there was more issues than that. And then this past year, 29th ranked defense, and we were 9-8. We had a winning record for the first time since 2017. And basically, if the Seattle Seahawks would have just lost one game, or maybe we don't have a tie, we're a playoff team. I want to see a gap. I want to see like, okay, it makes a massive difference. Since 2020, Goff has been getting paid. So since he's been getting paid, 2020, $28.8 million. They went 10-6 that year. They also had the top defense. 2020, and that was when everything kind of fell apart with McVay. 2021, technically his cap hit was lower at the Lions, but also we were paying the dead cap of Stafford, so I just put them together because it's basically what it was. Lions were paying $29.65 million to that position. They were 3-13-1 that year, but then this past year, while paying Jared Goff $31.15 million, we had one of the top offenses in the league, and we had one of the worst defenses in the league, yet we still went 9-8 on the season. So now you've seen that when you're paying him, you still had success. You could argue the closest thing was last year to Lamar Jackson, but still, it's about an $8 million difference in terms of cap it for Lamar Jackson. Let's continue with some statistics because now I'm going to start hitting y'all with some haymakers. The reason I'm doing this is to, again, I try to look and kind of flip every stone in terms of what kind of stats could I gather here to really see if I could find a separation stat, right? Okay, aside from going to the All-22 film, because I know we hear this and it's like, Goff throws a lot of play action. Yes, by next-gen stats, he had the third highest quarterback score this past season. Third highest in the league. Next-gen stats is kind of a new thing that they've developed. They used it since 2021, and Jared Goff had the third highest passing score. He was in the top 10. Lamar was not in the top 10. But one thing they brought up in that video is that over a quarter of the Lions snaps playoffs were play action. Had a maximum score of a 99 score out of 100. I think it's out of 100, either 100 or 99. He had a 99 score in play action. So the whole idea to me, first off, just to hit this for a second, that it's like, well, you know, we have to run play action with this guy, running too much play action. Oh, he's a system quarterback, that kind of thing. Like, I still don't understand this at all. I mean, if you want to tell me, like, look, Patrick Mahomes can play in any system, sure. Every quarterback could probably play in any system, but would they be successful in any system? That is the question you have to ask yourself. It's the reason that when y'all asked me this offseason if Jared Goff hit his ceiling, and I said, no, I don't think we've seen his ceiling yet, because I felt like with Ben Johnson and being able to mold an offense around Jared Goff, what we started to see in 2021 when they just added a little bit of help to it and how well he finished the season, I said, hey, I don't think he's hit his ceiling yet, because that's what it's about. Like, this is the same thing for Lamar Jackson. If I put Lamar Jackson in Tom Brady's offense, would it look great? No, because that's not him. You don't want him throwing the ball 40 times a game. Okay, he rarely ever does that. I think the most passing attempts he had in the game last year was 38. He doesn't do that. That's not what their offense is. Same thing, you could flip it. You want to put Tom Brady in Lamar's shoes? It's not going to look good. Can they still both be good quarterbacks? Absolutely. But that whole narrative of like, well, you know, it's too much play action, you know, for Jared Goff. That's easy. Like, it's easy, but he's really good at it. You could call it easy, but he's the best, maybe the best quarterback in the league at play action. So what's the problem with that? Are you getting results? It's easy to get caught up in the flash, but who cares unless it's giving you results? And for Lions, it gave results. We have one of our best offensive seasons I can even remember. And again, there's more than just Goff to that. There's also the credit of how the Lions build it, which we'll talk about. But here's some more stats to take a look at. Compared like opponents. Like opponents meaning these are when they played the same teams this past season. All right, there were 7 of these games where the Lions played the same teams that the Ravens did, or Lamar played the same teams that Goff did. Those are the stat comparison. You can see a little bit more points per game for Lamar, higher completion percentage for Goff, more passing yards per game for Goff, total yards leaning towards Lamar Jackson because of the rushing yards. And then the touchdown to interception ratio, he had 13 passing touchdowns to 6 interceptions. Goff had 9 touchdowns to 1 interception. You could say 16 total touchdowns if you want to include the rushing touchdowns as well. So that's against like opponents. Again, I'm looking for gaps here. All right, continuing. How about just the 2022 stats? I just threw those in here for a second. Higher completion percentage to Goff, higher yards per game passing to Goff, higher total yards per game to Goff, and I have to throw that in there because we know how much Lamar rushes to keep it fair. Okay, better touchdown to interception ratio than Lamar Jackson, higher adjusted yards gained per attempt, and it was actually one of the lower ones that we've seen from Lamar Jackson. Higher cap hit, and again, one went 9-8, the other one went 7-4. I'm not counting that Denver Broncos game. Only allowed in the games that Lamar played 20.6 points per game. And I just put it up there because I'm like, hey, if the Lions only allowed 20.6 points per game, you just went through their entire season, they would have went 12-5 on the year. I'm just, just to throw it out there, even though it's not a perfect way to compare, but I just thought I'd throw it out there. Now, getting into some of the advanced statistics, and I have a few of these. Deep ball. Because I hear it all the time. I've heard this for a long time. Goff can't throw the deep ball. No, he throws a different type of deep ball. And I don't really understand. There's got to be context to it when you say deep ball. What does that mean, deep ball? Well, here's some context to it, okay? So actually, shout out to my man, Rams House, on Twitter. He sent me this, and it got me to digging into it a little bit deeper. Together a deep ball project every single year. And here we go. I compared the two, this year and last year. Now, obviously, scenarios there. Lions had 0 deep threats last year, and their pass protection was terrible, right? So that was the case. But again, there's still factors that Lamar has to deal with as well. So I'm not using that excuse. I just want to put them up against each other. So this past season, you can see the accuracy percentage, which isn't completion percentage. It's how many of these deep ball passes, 20+1 yards, in the air were accurate. They said Goff's 46.5% of those passes were accurate in comparison to Lamar Jackson's 35.9% were accurate. And then you can see the stats across the board. Lamar 3 touchdowns, 3 picks, 10 of 41. And then Goff 16 of 44, 4 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. And then you can see the yard differential. 2021, Lamar has better stat line here, right? Well, this was a disaster because you can see Goff only had 32 deep passing attempts, which is a pretty stark difference. 5 touchdowns, 1 interception, 323 yards. They said 40.6% accuracy, which isn't terrible. And then Lamar Jackson, much better accuracy that year, 46.3%, even though he's only 11 for 41. Actually, a lot of that had to do with the game where we played him, where they had like 3 bombs that were dropped. So again, the accuracy percentage was better, but still, of those 2 seasons, Goff had a higher accuracy percentage than either of the past 2 seasons Lamar put together. So again, the point that I'm making here, again, okay, where is he making us exponentially better that it makes sense to go do this? That's what I'm trying to figure out. Let's take a look at some more stats here, okay? Now, some of this is Lamar Jackson's playoff stats, and we'll get to that. But the first thing I want to take a look at is third downs. Why am I doing this? it's a big time down, right? It's a big time down. A lot of times they're asked to sit back there and throw. It's one of the things I talked about Anthony Richardson, where they don't really ask him to do it. So it's something that is not there right now, which is concerning. But not speaking on that right now, third downs. This past season on third down, okay, conversion percentage. Jared Goff converted 43.2% of his third downs this past year when passing the football, which was 9th in the NFL. Lamar Jackson converted 34.6% of those, so a pretty big difference there. Now, when I include his rushing, it makes it a lot closer. When you include rushing for Goff and Lamar, Goff converted 42.5% of his third downs. Again, that means that Goff is rushing or throwing. That doesn't mean we're handing it off. That means Goff is rushing or throwing. Same thing with Lamar. Still, by a hair, Jared Goff has a higher conversion percentage this past season. Then you break it down into the splits. 8 to 10 yards passing. When it was a third down between 8 to 10 yards, you can see Goff's stat line here. He had 19 first downs, which was first in the NFL. Completed 77.5% of his passes, which is a huge difference. 94.6 pass rating. Between 4 and 7 yards on third down. Jared Goff, 20 first downs, tied for 11th in the NFL. A 105.6 passer rating. Completed 60% of his passes. Again, numbers across the board better there for Jared Goff. How about 11 plus yards? Okay. Jared Goff completed 60% of his passes, over 90 pass rating, 7 first downs, tied for third in the league. Compare that to Lamar's stats, 36.2 passer rating, 2 first downs, 50% completion percentage. Big part of this, of course, is passing attempts as well, but that's why I include the rushing stats on the top to, again, try to equalize it. Now, again, this kind of goes back to the point that I just made about system and those types of things. Statistically, historically, Lamar Jackson may take more deep shots and things of that nature downfield. But the thing that's most important to this is, again, playing to your strength. All right. So when Jared Goff takes a 2-yard check down on first down, and it's not super exciting, that can be a very important play for him instead of having an incomplete pass deep. Reason being is because 2nd and 7, 2nd and 8 is much better for him than being in 2nd and 10. Because now that run play better at least get you 5 yards, or all of a sudden you're in a really tough spot on the third down. So the point is that that's a big time difference there, is that for Goff, he has to play to his strengths. So he hasn't had tons of passing attempts on 3rd and 11 plus, but that's because he's got to play to his strengths. His strength is all on schedule. All right, he doesn't want things to get off schedule. So when he takes a 2-yard check down on first down, and people hate, oh man, he's a check down guy. That makes sense for him though, because if he's pushing the ball, you're going to see less conversions on third down because he doesn't want to be in that situation where it's 3rd and 10. That's not him. You want to limit those. So for him, everything he wants to keep on schedule by at least getting positive yards every play. Or not taking a sack or something like that, which pretty much throws off the entire drive. A guy like Lamar could play that a little different. He's got a bigger arm. He's more mobile. He can create things off script. A lot of his big time plays, they just come completely off script, where he's like spinning out of stuff and then he finds someone wide open. You're not going to get that with Goff. Here's an example of what I mean. So Tampa Bay drops into a Tampa 2 look here. And I can tell you, Goff would have thrown this right there to that spot route to the tight end. Lamar held it a little bit longer, tried to take a shot towards the middle of the field, and he's going to do things like that more than Goff would. So understanding that he's not going to do that, he has to make sure that he tries to stay on schedule the best that he possibly can. Now, for this next stat, unfortunately, I couldn't really find a really good comparison here. I tried to find these stats across the internet. I could not find them. But just to kind of put some things in perspective, there was an under pressure, top 10 quarterbacks who went under pressure stat that was put out December 15th this past season, so near the end of the year. Goff was 6th in the NFL in passer rating when deemed under pressure. I believe that was according to Pro Football Focus. All right? Lamar Jackson was not in the top 10. Time to throw on there. Again, 3 seconds for Lamar. A lot of that is because it's going to sway because of how long you can hold the ball by creating things off script. Because one thing that I think is important to remember here is I know the perception of Lamar, I think, is much different than what the reality is of how that offense plays. I didn't expect to see how many quick throws that offense implements. That Ravens offense is tons of quick throws. RPOs, flats, slants, spot up routes for the tight end. So much of their offense is very quick. 1, 2, 3, get out. 1, 2, 3, get out. Very quick in that sense. I didn't expect to see a ton of that. And then we're going to show passing grids in a second. But I didn't expect that was going to be as much as it was. But trust me, it's a lot of their offense, and I didn't really anticipate to see that, but I guess it makes sense. Next gen stat score. So this is all next gen stats combined together for passing quarterbacks. Goff had the 7th highest this past year. Lamar had the 21st highest. And the little thing I put at the bottom is just because, again, I couldn't find clean pocket stats stats versus pressure. I really wanted to find that. But we know Goff can play really well in a clean pocket. We saw this past year, you know, when he got Chicago or I don't know, Miami, and he's in a clean pocket and it's just easy. He was third in the NFL in passer rating in 2019 when he had a clean pocket. So I just throw that out there just to help understand that he was actually really good in a clean pocket, and we know this. It's just the off-schedule stuff where you get a lot of inconsistencies because for every quarterback, it's all over the place because there's so many variables that go into it. Lamar Jackson, across the board, he has a lower passer rating when throwing the ball, whether that was deep left, deep middle, or deep right, this past season, than Jared Goff. Okay, Goff was much better across the board there on 20-plus yard passes, which kind of goes back to the point that I made earlier, just to kind of put that in more perspective. Notice Goff is really good throwing to his right. That's always been the case for some weird reason. He's always been much better throwing to the right side. Think of the first touchdown, the DJ Chark, against Philly. I think that was his first touchdown. That one to his right, like he's way better at throwing it to his right on those timing routes. Just a go ball, 1, 2, 3, put it up. Way better at throwing to his right, I feel like historically. But I think that kind of showcases that here. Moving into between 10 to 20 yards, you could see Lamar Jackson has been pretty elite here. Not to say Goff was bad this past season, but Lamar's been pretty elite in this category. And you see that in their offense. I think a big reason for this is how much the tight ends are utilized. They drafted Mark Andrews, Aiden Hurst. They drafted Mark Andrews, drafted Charlie Kohler. They drafted Isaiah Likely. They brought in a lot of tight ends. A lot of really nice receiving tight ends, and that's been a huge part of their offense is throwing to tight ends, and we're going to talk about that a little bit in a second. Then you move inside a little bit more between 0 and 10 yards. This is where Goff wins across the board. Why? You can see it on film. He's more consistent here. That'd be the best way that I put it, right? Just more consistent. Now, to Lamar's credit, going back watching some 2020 versus 2022, much more consistent underneath than what he was. I think he's really improved there, to his credit. But there's still a lot of inconsistencies. Just in terms of being accurate, too many below average or poor graded passes that I have there where he's breaking stride for guys that are underneath. But there's just less consistency within that part of the field, and that's where Goff gets very consistent, going back to the timing part. Now, this kind of draws you back to the beginning of the video when I asked the question, does trading for Lamar Jackson improve the Lions' chances to go win the whole Super Bowl, to go win the whole thing? And my answer to that would be no. It's a clear no for me, and I think the numbers all kind of represent this. I could be wrong, but from everything I've looked at, it doesn't actually give the Lions a better chance to be a Super Bowl team by trading for Lamar Jackson. First off, back to the number part we talked about. So Lamar Jackson hasn't really got paid yet. He's going to get paid a much higher cap hit per season than what Goff's cap hit, I'm going to assume, is for the next 2 years. The next 2 years, Goff, we know he's at about $30 million. It's going to fall in about league average. All right, we're already seeing that number start to get pushed down. Daniel Jones, things like that. It's going to be about league average, okay, which is a great price point. It's why I said 2023 and 2024 is a Lions potential Super Bowl window, because Goff's cap hit's going to be middling, and he's playing to that level or better. And at the same time, we've been able to put such a fast supporting cast around with flexibility. We can go win right now. So does going to get Lamar improve those chances? The answer to me is no. First off, because of that reason. Lamar hasn't got paid yet. His cap is going to be much higher than Goff's. And there is a thing called the salary cap, which for some reason people seem to always overlook this. It's a huge part of it. Baltimore Ravens had a top 2-3 defense pretty much every single season Lamar was there. And he wasn't getting paid. Still on top of that, they've only won one playoff game. Now, I don't like to be that guy that's like, well, you've only won one playoff game. I'm not trying to be that guy because there's so many variables. One play can change the whole thing. You can see his playoff stats on the left, though. Passing stats, completing 56% of his passes, 3 touchdowns, 5 picks, 225 passing yards a game, 68.3 pass rating. In the middle is each game stat line that he puts up. The one win, 17 of 24. How inefficient it is passing the football, which is understandable. It happens to pretty much everybody when you're in that situation. And then Jared Goff's, his passing stats in the playoffs are on the right. They're better across the board, aside from a little bit lower passing yards per game. He's 4-2. Lamar's 1-3. But the reason I point this out is because Lamar Jackson isn't getting paid, but they've had a 2 or 3 ranked defense. Those 3 years that they've been in the playoffs, 18, 19, and 20, and understandably he's young, so I think he's going to get improved and get better. I think he has been getting better. But the point here is that they've had either the second ranked defense or the third ranked defense in terms of scoring allowed going into the playoffs, right? Their regular season statistics. So basically, you've had one of the top defenses in all of the years that you've been in the playoffs, and you weren't paying Lamar Jackson at the time. I get there's also the aspect that he was a rookie, but you weren't paying Lamar Jackson. So basically, what you're telling me is that you're going to then pay Lamar Jackson $40-50 million a year. You still need a top defense from what we've seen. Am I supposed to believe that paying him money is going to lead to a better chance to get to the Super Bowl if that's not happening with the Baltimore Ravens. I'm not putting that on him, but I think there's a clear point that needs to be made here of that if you have a top defense and you're not having success in the playoffs and you're not even paying the quarterback, what happens when he gets paid? Do you think the odds are really going to improve? It's like, hey, now there's a better shot that we go into the Super Bowl because now he's getting paid. The Lions have had the worst ranked one of the worst defenses last 2 years ranked in the NFL. So we're trying to fix that while also paying this guy and giving up our 2 first-round picks? So last night I was thinking through this, and I think you can go back to even before the last regime, right, when we would always say with Stafford, man, if we could just have an average defense, we'd have an opportunity here. But if you go back to the last regime, I see similarities in the sense that we went a different way, right? When the last regime came in, they wanted to build this defense, and they did it through the secondary, and they tried. They were desperate to find a corner, and we saw that they attempted that, right? They probably overpaid for Trufant, probably overpaid for Coleman, drafted Okuda high, maybe even if they didn't want to, because they were trying to figure that thing out. By the way, it's not a new idea. When the Rams understood that they could score like they could offensively, they were making trades for corners. They traded for Peters, they traded for Talib. Then after that, they're like, let those guys go, we're trading for Ramsey. They went after guys that they knew could play. And they never really were able to figure that out. This regime took a different approach. They know that they have to fix that. It's why Aaron Glenn brought it up. It's why after the season, Brad Holmes said, 32nd ranked defense, it's got to get better. Now, the promising part of that is it did get a lot better through the season when we just got a little bit healthy defensively. But they took a different approach. They got here, and the first thing they did is say, okay, let's fix this offense. Let's finish off this offense, I should say. Let's get the tackle. We know how to make this work for Goff, which we're going to talk about in a second. We're going to fix that first. In the meantime, we're going to then also build the trenches. Now we have to figure out that cornerback position to kind of tie it all in together. But what do we know historically about the last 5 teams that have made the Super Bowl? You have to have a top defense in the NFL, top offense in the NFL, which is something that the Lions have. Okay, we've seen that. All of them top offenses in the NFL. Doesn't mean the best, but it's one of the best offenses. The Lions had that this past season. But what people seem to overlook is you also have to have an above average defense. All of them have had that, an above average defense that can show up in the big moments. And we talked about this during last season. What was the difference between us losing games and beginning to win games? To me, it wasn't just, okay, Lions players are, they're playing better together now all of a sudden. It was the fact that you were getting healthier defensively. And for the Lions, a lot of those wins, not all, came through the fact that defensively, you came through. I mean, our first win to break that big streak was Green Bay at home. Defense got us off the field and did it. Doesn't mean you have to have the best defense. It just means that they have to make the key play, get a key stop at the end of the game to get your offense back on the field, seal the game with the defense, and be above average. You can't have the worst defense in football. So you need those two things to go together. And if you look at the Lions, they have basically one of those. The next step is becoming an above average defense. The promising aspect to that is that they got much better. They were pushing, towards getting to that level, at least in the passing defense side of things. That's where the emphasis has to go. So if I give up 2 first-round picks and pay a ton of money to a different quarterback, not even talking about changing schemes or anything like that, now I also still have to get that defense to above average. And again, with Lamar, we haven't seen playoff success with one of the best defenses. So on the top there, I try to put together some examples, and not all of them were just, the defense stepped up. Sometimes our offense didn't make the play. I mean, Buffalo, for example, we had an opportunity there to take the lead, and we were forced to take a field goal. But still, that game should have went to overtime. We shouldn't have gave up a field goal right before the end of the game. So things like that happened. Miami, we had an opportunity to go win it offensively. We got stopped on 4th down, but defensively still, if we could have got a stop, we could have got back on the field. So not always exactly, but we did play one of the Super Bowl teams last year in the Philadelphia Eagles, and we lost 35-38. Interestingly enough, the team that beat Philly won 38-35. Very tight. I don't think we're super far away. But when you look at that game, our defense did some great things. They forced 2 back-to-back punts, got us back on the field, allowed us to get back within 3. The issue was we couldn't get that third and final stop that could have given ourselves a chance to at least tie the game, which, by the way, we were playing, I would assume we would have. So that's my point here. My point is I don't think the Lions are that far, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this. I don't think they're that far. With that being said, though, I think, if anything, this would take you steps back. The whole conclusion of this whole situation is it's not the question of is Lamar Jackson better than Jared Goff. As a passer, I would argue he's not. From the games that I've watched in all 22, I went through all Goff's, of course, but Lamar Jackson, I would argue he's not a more consistent passer than Jared Goff, and I think he puts the ball in harm's way a little bit more just because, and it's more on deep passes, because of things that he does off schedule, less anticipation throws. It's more kind of like things broken down where I think mistakes start to come into play. You're going to get less of that naturally with Jared Goff, so I think that's a part of it. I look at it, the question isn't, is Lamar Jackson better than Jared Goff? Even if you want to sit here and tell me Lamar is better than Jared Goff, even if you want to tell me that, I'm like, you know what, that's fine. You say Lamar's better than Jared Goff, that's fine. I'm not saying I'm going to agree with you on that necessarily, but I'll even take that. Say Lamar's better than Jared Goff. To me, that question is irrelevant. That question is irrelevant. Is he Patrick Mahomes? No. This doesn't matter. It does not matter to me giving up tons of money, draft resources, then trying to fix this defense on top of it. How is that going to happen? Now, to add to that, because I always hear it's like, okay, well, hold up. His weapons haven't been very good. Well, again, this goes back to the way that you build a team for different players schematically. Like, there's certain ways that certain players are successful. And I'm not saying that the Lions haven't done a better job at putting a team around our quarterback in 2 seasons than they did with Lamar Jackson. But we do know that's also an aspect of it, that if you're going to get Lamar, things are going to change. He's a different style quarterback. You're not just going to be like, oh, he's doing the same thing. Do it here. Things are definitely going to change. Personnel is likely going to have to change because he plays a different style. The Ravens use more fullbacks. They use tight ends, all right? And they want speedsters on the outside to just take the top off, right? So not saying we don't have some of those things, but that's also an aspect of it. But when you think about what the Ravens have invested in terms of the receiving core, think about this for a second. We talked about Hayden Hurst, Mark Andrews were both drafted in 2018. 2019, they used a first-round pick on Marquise Brown, a third-round pick on Miles Boykin. Again, I'm not saying these necessarily worked out, but I'm telling you what they did. 2020, second round pick on J.K. Dobbins, third round pick on Devin Duvernay, the receiver, and Prochet, the sixth round pick of 2020. 2021, a first round pick on a receiver, Rashad Bateman, a fourth round pick on a receiver, Tylan Wallace. They also signed free agent Sammy Watkins. This past season, Charlie Kohler in the fourth round tight end, Isaiah Likely in the fourth round tight end, Beatty running back in the sixth round, and they went out and they signed Patrick Ricard. Now, compare that to what the Lions have put together. And I don't want to compare the setup and say, okay, hey, Lions have given less to the receiving core. What we know is you only have so much money to go around. Everything's not going to be perfect. Unless you never miss on a draft pick, everything is not going to be perfect in terms of your supporting cast. So you have to emphasize certain things. Where are we going to spend money? It's why Aaron Glenn said, I believe defense is built through D-line and cornerback. You can't spend it everywhere. I can't have the top paid linebacker, cornerback, safety, defensive tackle. I can't. I don't have that kind of cash. It just doesn't work. So you have to focus on certain aspects. What the Lions have done with Goff is, I'll put this thing up one more time because I know we showed this a lot, that from 2020, before we had Goff, the receiving core was Kenny Golladay, Marvin Jones, Jamal Agnew, TJ Hockenson, Danny Amendola. All of that, which was getting paid way more than what we're paying the receiving core now, has in 2 years became St. Brown is a fourth round pick, Khalif Raymond, who wasn't barely playing with Tennessee, so he was a free agent pickup on a very cheap deal. Josh Reynolds was cut middle of the season because he was not playing, so we claimed him. We traded away TJ Hockenson midway through the season, who actually averaged more yards per game with us than he did with the Minnesota Vikings, but we still got production out of that unit just differently, and the more of the production went to the receiver position. And yes, we drafted a first-round receiver in Jameis Williams, though he hasn't really even played for us yet. G.J. Chark will be the biggest investment the Lions have made, who had a really nice season for us last year. He just didn't play all of the games. The difference is, instead of investing heavily in that position, it's almost like not taking Jamar Chase and instead taking Penei Sewell, but we didn't have the chance to take Jamar Chase. But instead, your investment went immediately to finish the offensive line, draft Penei Sewell, sign Jamal Williams. It was one of the only 2-year deals you even gave out in your first year. It was some of the biggest money you spend free agency. Go get me a running back because this needs to go. We need to get a running game, and we need to protect Goff. All right? If we can do those two things, he can excel. Why do we know this? Because when he was young, back in 2017, the first year with McVay, they drafted Cooper Kupp, they drafted Josh Reynolds, and they drafted Gerald Everett. Most of their receiving core is rookies. I believe the leader in receptions was running back Todd Gurley, but he was very successful in 2018. 28 touchdowns, 7 picks from a terrible 2016 season. Extremely successful with a lot of young guys. Why? Offensive line was very good, and they could run the football, and they rolled with the young guys. So again, it's what Jared Goff does well, the emphasis isn't necessarily we got to have the top paid receivers. No, we need to be able to protect him, because when he's in a clean pocket, as the stat that I brought up earlier, in 2018, third highest passer rating, very good in a clean pocket. He wants to stay on schedule. He's not going to take all the shots in the road. If they're there, he might take it, but he's not going to force shots downfield, because he knows that it's great to hit it, but if it's incomplete, now we're behind the sticks. That's not me. I need to stay ahead of the sticks. I need positive yards. So I will take the check down way more than most quarterbacks will. And that's fine. It doesn't have to look pretty. It's just who he is. Again, everybody that you go get, you're going to have to invest differently. Obviously, the Ravens has invested in a ton. I would argue much more around than what we've invested. Part of that is the amount of time. But we're paying way less, all right? We're paying way less to the receiver position, and we're getting much more production than we were getting in 2020. You went from those names to this names that are getting more production, and now you have a running game. So, back to the point. Does trying to go acquire Lamar, paying him, giving up first-round picks, give you a better chance to win a Super Bowl? My answer is no. I think you have a shot to do it with Jared Goff these next 2 years. But the biggest thing to this, desperate teams are paying quarterbacks like this. They are. They're desperate to find a quarterback. The Lions don't want to be that desperate team. So how do you avoid that? Make sure you have a plan at quarterback. Okay? So again, I do believe that Jared Goff, after 2 years, and he's going to be successful these next 2 years, that, you know, he would take a friendly deal. I think he would. I don't know. I'm not going to speak for him. I think he would, though. However, part of the reason that you can have a succession plan is because I do believe they will draft a quarterback this year. That's how you stay from being desperate and saying we don't have anybody. You have to draft it, because odds are he's going to miss. So you may have to come back next year and draft another quarterback. But that's how you avoid being that team becomes desperate. That's like, I got to pay so much money to a quarterback. We don't want to be in that spot anymore. And gratefully, Jared Goff has taken us out of that. He didn't let us go into that with a Matthew Stafford trade, because we easily could have, but he didn't let us go down that road. He's more durable naturally because he doesn't run as much as Lamar Jackson. You understand what he does well, how he can be successful, and that's all we need from the dude. Then to avoid desperation, you draft a quarterback and see if it can hit. And great, best case scenario, it works out. Now you have an option if Jared Goff is not getting an extension down the road. So that's how you avoid that scenario. Lions will be making a desperate move by trying to go acquire Lamar, especially if it's more than the 5-year, $250 million, $130 guaranteed dollars that it was reported that he was offered. To pay more than that and give up 2 first-round picks is a desperate move, and the Lions don't need to be desperate. They don't need to be desperate. They need to stay out of that. For long-term success, you can't be a desperate team at quarterback, and the Lions right now are not, and their plan is, I believe, not to be that way. So with that being said, no, I would definitely not try to go get Lamar Jackson. It's nothing against Lamar. I'm a fan of him and watching him as a player. He's very fun to watch. He's creative. But the point being is that I don't want that. And you go into, well, you know, he's not playing for his team. You know, he's sitting, he wants his money and all this and that. And it's like, you can make any case like that if you want. I'm not even going to go down that road. I just think by the numbers alone, it doesn't make any sense for the Lions. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you, Prop, for watching.